This video is about life after GP training, making choices in sessional GP work. So this video covers aspects of being employed as a GP, so different roles, the BMA contract, different tools for supporting salaried GPs and the organisations where you can be employed. It's part of a series of videos for newly qualified GPs. The other two videos cover aspects of working as a locum, which are the blue sections here, and then aspects that are generic to salaried and locum work, which are the brown squares. Let's look at different roles for salaried GPs. Originally, when salaried GP posts were created, they did purely GP clinical work. And there was a big gap between what the role of the salaried GP and the partner might be, because above this there was also a number of layers of activity such as teaching and supervising, specialist clinical work like fitting coils, minor surgery. Then above this there might be taking a lead on QOF areas. Higher up there might be leading on CQC, IT, significant event and complaints. And then line management of other staff, including doctors. And then at the top of the ladder, you're an employer, contract holder and premises owner. And there was a big contrast between the role of the partner and of the salaried GP. As we've moved towards larger organisations working at scale, salaried GPs may have roles at several of these levels, and it's important that these roles are reflected in their job plan and also in their pay grade. It's important to remember also that those GPs who prefer to remain restricted to a purely clinical role may have senior roles and other specialist roles outside the practice, as we explained earlier. There are quite a few options in terms of being an employed or salaried GP. The traditional salaried role, working for one team and one practice, is one where you're employed on the BMA model contract, and this is a requirement if you work in a GMS or PMS practice. The role can vary though depending on the kind of organisation, and increasingly we find that in practices that work across several sites or as part of super partnerships, that a salaried role can include many of the leadership roles that might previously be included in a partner's role. So you may have special areas of interest, teaching, training, and you may even have some supervisory roles for other staff. The next option is the retainer scheme, and this is for doctors who are at risk of leaving general practice. You can work up to 4 sessions, and the scheme post provides mentoring and help with professional subscription costs. You can also combine this with outside work and you'll remain on the scheme for up to a maximum of 5 years. The other kind of role you may come across is one where you're salaried to a federation to work across several practices as a locum. So although you're on an employment contract, you're not fixed or attached to one team. This can provide more security than locum work, but with a little bit of extra protection in terms of a more defined workload than if you worked salaried to one team. If you're on the model contract, it will include the 1 session of CPD per week pro rata, which of course is a significant benefit over working as a locum. Finally, there's the Career Plus scheme, which was created to try and retain older doctors, and again it's an employed role but where you may be roaming and working between several practices. It allows portfolio working and special interests. Let's look at what's included in the model BMA salaried contract in terms of who has to offer it, hours and leave, other benefits and pay. So if you're employed by a GMS practice since 2004, the requirement is that you're employed on this contract, and also since 2015, if you're employed by a PMS practice, you should be offered terms no less favourable. The hours are defined as 37.5 is full-time, and that equates to 9 sessions, including 4 hours of CPD. You're entitled to 6 weeks of annual leave plus bank holidays, of which there are 8 a year, plus 2 statutory NHS holidays. If you work in excess of your contracted hours, you're entitled to overtime or time in lieu. And finally, you're entitled to time, additional time for appraisal. There are a number of benefits which are based on continuous NHS service, and this is service not just with that employer but with previous NHS employers, and that includes maternity pay, paternity pay, redundancy and sickness pay. And then there are other aspects like your pay must be above the minimum specified in the BMA range and is subject to an annual uplift as recommended by the Doctors and Dentists Review Body. You're entitled to be in the NHS pension scheme, and the practice pays your LMC levy to make sure you're represented. When you do receive your contract, even if the advert or the employer states that it is the BMA contract, please make sure you get it checked by the BMA's contract checking service. The Salaried GP handbook on the BMA website should be your first port of call for any aspects relating to the model contract. And always remember that before you sign a contract, ask the BMA contract checking service to check the contract that you've been offered. One of the things that is important to get right when you start a new job is job planning and balancing the different parts of that role. So as part of the job plan, it's important that the workload matches the hours and is a realistic match for the hours. The activities need to reflect the different roles that that person has. So if they've got roles in being QOF lead, teaching or supervision, there needs to be time allocated to this. There needs to be recognition that clinical work involves both direct contact but also indirect clinical care, like managing letters, labs and prescriptions. This work needs to be balanced with other non-clinical work like meetings, CPD and other specialist roles such as fitting coils and so on, and minor surgery. It's important that any days which are longer or extended are made up by time back at other times, and usually the job plan is reviewed regularly through the in-house performance review, which is linked also to potentially a review of the contract and a review of pay. This graph shows the proportion of direct patient care to indirect patient care, administration and other activities as reflected in a national survey. If we look at a salaried GP who may have a role outside the practice, we can see on the left hand side here the box that ties together job planning, in-house performance review by the line manager and pay review, and then on the right hand side the review in his role outside the practice. And these are tied together of course by the NHS appraisal, which occurs outside the practice and takes on board documentation from both of the reviews that occur for the salaried GP within these other organisations. An important concept to get your head around when you qualify is the concept of the pension tiers, as you will need to determine which tier your work gets superannuated at. And this depends on whether your roles fall under practitioner roles, where the tier is based on your actual income, or whether your roles are officer roles, where the tier is based on your whole-time equivalent income, regardless of the hours which you work. So let's look at some examples. On the green side, we've got somebody who's doing portfolio work. They're doing a series of part-time roles, working salaried, locums, appraisals, some CCG work and out-of-hours work. And their total income is going to be added up from those different streams of work. There's also a example here of somebody who's doing some hospital work, and their actual income is 14,000, and that's based on a whole-time equivalent salary of 75,000. They're also employed in an educator role on the vocational training scheme and are perhaps earning 18,000, which is their part-time income based on a whole-time equivalent salary of 90,000. So let's see which tiers they need to select to superannuate their income. Well, the practitioner needs to add up the actual income for each of those roles, and that total income then determines which tier that they're on. So their total income is 74, and that falls under the bracket of 13.5%. In contrast, these officer roles, so the clinical assistant role, the tier is based on the whole-time equivalent income. So even though they're only earning 14,000, they're superannuated on the tier relating to 75,000. So that's again the 13.5% tier. And again, the other role, the VTS role, is superannuated based on the whole-time equivalent income. So again at the 13.5 tier. And we need to look at the annual cycle for superannuation. So before each financial year, the practice will submit an estimate of pensionable profits for all salaried GPs, and this determines which tier the GP will be superannuated at. But we need to remember that that tier needs to take into account income earned outside the practice. So it's very important for portfolio GPs to inform their practice of their expected income from other practitioner roles, such as locums, out-of-hours appraisal, CCG work, and so on. The income is then deducted, the superannuation is then deducted at that tier for the rest of the year. And at the end of the year, there's a Type 2 practitioner form which is submitted at the end of April following the end of the financial year, and on this form you declare your actual income and the actual superannuation you've paid, and this is a way of ensuring that any overpaid or underpaid income is put right, so it allows you to pay arrears or to have an overpayment repaid. And it's important to realise that the pension record kept at the NHS Pensions Agency, it will not be updated until this form is submitted by you. So just to clarify, a Type 2 practitioner is somebody who is either a salaried GP employed by a practice or APMS. It may be a long-term locum working in a practice for more than 6 months. It may also be somebody working for an out-of-hours organisation, which is not a trust, and this can be in an employed or self-employed capacity. This graph shows an interesting finding of the correlation between the number of sessions worked and the number of hours worked per session. So what has been found from workload surveys is that GPs working fewer sessions per week tend to work more hours per session, and so sessions are often closer to 7 hours if you work less than 5 sessions a week, whereas if you work between 9 and 10 sessions a week, sessions on average are closer to 5 hours per session. For more information about salaried GP roles, please have a look at the BMA Salaried GP Handbook, which is on the BMA website and available to its members. Also, you may find it useful to look at the National Association of Sessional GPs website and other videos relating to sessional work which are on my YouTube channel.